G'day guys, it's the coach and welcome to a pretty special episode from myself. It's something that we haven't really touched on just yet, but something that is probably near and dear to my heart, something that I have personally focused on for the last probably 12 to 18 months. It's something that I've kind of really focused on and I found that's probably become some of the most enjoyable moments in my hobby right now. And that is Kit Bashing and Conversion. And the Cities of Sigmar, for me, a book that I really love, has probably drawn this out from myself more than ever. And I'm noticing in the community, this particular book has really exploded the opportunity when it comes to kit bashing and converting. Not to say that it's exclusive to only this particular book, but I'm seeing it really come to life. And I know in myself that is certainly true. But in the house here, I have two absolute legends when it comes to kit bashing, converting. When I show you some of their pictures, you will be, your mind will blow. You might have to take a moment, pause the video, pick up your mind, put it back into your head, because it is absolutely incredible what these gentlemen are doing. First off, we have JP Miniatures. He's in the center. Jonathan, g'day, an absolute legend. Do you want to give me an introduction? Because I'll just keep waffling and being a fanboy because you guys both just blow my mind.
No, thank you very much. No, I'm Jon. I'm mostly famous for tweaking and converting things, sticking them back together in unorthodox ways. Mostly, I've done Beastmen in the past, but I'm starting to branch out into some other things. In fact, I've started, like you were saying before, the Cities of Sigmar book has been really fascinating, and I've actually started a Living City army off the back of some of your previous videos. In fact,
thank you. But it's I don't know what it is about particular the Cities of Sigmar book, but it just seems like kit bashing and converting has become accepted. I think in the past because I've been here since day one, and people have done little bits of hobby, and they've certainly kit bashed. This is not a new concept, but it seems like from a tournament perspective, it seems like from a gaming perspective, the opportunity to create, as well as the acceptance to have Phoenix Guard that aren't Phoenix Guard, to do something like a Griffin that isn't a Griffin. In the past, that would kind of be like, you kind of look, we're getting into the topic here, but it's great to have you, and I'm excited to, and some of your city stuff is awesome too. I absolutely love, and I'll get to show some of that off. But JP, good to have you here. Also here is of Warhammer television fame. He's not going to like that, but I don't care. It's great. Ricki, the gentleman, is from the Midnight City, and if you haven't seen his work, it's just incredible too. It's so great that he's got his own battle tome. It's awesome. It's very, very cool. I've been absolutely inspired by Ricki's work as well. So Ricki, anything you want to say to the fine folks of the internet?
Thank you. I'm Ricki. I tend to take projects a little bit too far. I'm living what the teenage me wished they could do back then. So the big, weird things. And when you're a teenager, you think, I really want to do something, but I can't. I was like, I've hit a point where I'm living that teenage dream now.
I remember my first conversion, and because when we all started, or at least when I started, it was metal miniatures. So kit bashing and converting was a hard thing. I remember shaving off the moustache off my general, and I think I'd kit bashed a weapon, and I thought that was pretty grand at the time. But because shaving down metal was the absolute pain in the butt. And I certainly didn't have the tools as like a 13 or 14-year-old kid. I think I'd stolen a scalpel from the science room because I didn't know where to get a scalpel from, and I don't think I ever replaced the blade in 4 years. Again, I'm a child. I have no idea. But it's crazy how the world has kind of changed. And you're right, we are living kind of in a golden age when it comes to hobby.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's probably kick off the discussion if you guys are down. I mean, it's only 6 o'clock in the morning for me, so I could chin wag forever. So let's start. Let's start maybe high level here. So, why should somebody kit bash and or convert? And I'm using this very generically. It's basically what I'm talking about here, folks, is why would you consider building your models not not standard. So when I go to Games Workshop and I buy a box of whatever, I could build them just as they are in the box. Why should I not do that? And why should I do something different? Whether it's convert, whether that is getting parts from other kits, whether it is getting third-party sources, whether it is using tools like green stuff to, or even modify a particular body. An example of this is I'm building Gargants right now, and I'm suspecting that I might need 9 to 12 Gargants. They might be my battle line Gargants. The Gargants are monopose. They are one big fat dude walking forward. Having 9 to 12 big fat dudes walking forward looks boring. So, high level, why should I kit bash, convert, modify the models that are standard from the box? Ricki, start me off.
It's hard. So GW release a model and it's a great indicator of one way that thing can be. That's what a giant looks like. It gives us the rough outline of what a giant looks like. But as you're saying, when you've got 12 of them, that's not what all the giants look like. It's not necessarily what your giants look like or the way you imagined them when you first read it before you even saw the model. So it's using what's there to create what you envisioned, what's unique to you, and what ultimately is going to be recognizable as your army rather than just an army of Gargants. Or
yeah, agreed. Like right now, I'm reading the Soulbound book, and while I don't have a battle tome yet for the Gargants, I've really narrowed this down to I want my Gargants to come from Akshi, so that ties in well with Soulbound. I want it to tie into my Free Cities book. So my Free Cities, I've put my little city in a little island called the Opal Isles, in between Hallow Heart and Tempest Eye, which is near this big fire, kind of like a big fire. And I started going further into the lore of fire Gargants or fire giants from Dungeons and Dragons. So I've got these ideas, and I'm looking at this Gargant, and I'm going, this doesn't look like a fire Gargant. And I'm like, do I just paint it red? Is it black because it's like charcoal? Like, do I just buy some flamers? Or like you're right. Like, how do I make this idea come to the table? JP, what are your thoughts? Like, why should somebody consider kit bashing and converting?
For me, that's the main point of this hobby, really. For me, when I started out, I was mostly a painter and converter, and it took me a few years to get into the gaming side of things. But when I started out, the thing that really appealed to me was you could take something, you can change it, you can paint it however you want. And when people talk to me about the hobby in general, they say, oh yeah, but compared to video games, for example, it's so much more expensive. And you say, yes, but you can change it. You can do whatever you want with it. You can make it yours. And it's, in my opinion, a lot more soothing, a lot more relaxing. And you can find, like Ricki was saying, you can find your niche, your own particular version of a Space Marine, your own particular version of a Beastman. And it's, I think, that customization that really, for me, is the reason I'm in the hobby at all.
Yeah, I always enjoy the, maybe I'm special. Maybe I like, going to a tournament and my army looks different than every other army. And you can obviously showcase that with your painting skills. I don't think I'm the best painter in the world. I don't think I'm the worst painter in the world. I think I'm probably, I like to think that I'm above average. And that's mostly because I wouldn't say I'm lazy. I just like get this law of diminishing returns where I'm like, I could put this fourth highlight on a model, but I'd rather work on something else.
Yeah.
But for me, like converting and kit bashing, and I remember how much joy I got from doing a couple of Stormcast heroes, but using the third-party head swaps from Forge World, the male and the females. And I'm just like, yes, my Knight of Zeros looks mostly like everyone else's Knight of Zeros, but it's got a different head. And that makes it my Knight of Zeros compared to everyone else's. And I think that makes me feel good, and it makes me stand out just a little bit.
And it doesn't have to be anything particularly complicated. Sometimes a head swap is enough, and it makes a massive difference. I mean, sometimes you see armies, and that's all they've done. It's just a head swap, but it completely changes the feel of a whole army. Just something small like that.
It's that little personal touch, that accent that's yours. Because you might love the entire base model, but it's that little touch that's you that's gone on top of it.
Do you think? I mean, do you think somebody? I mean, we're talking about the generic person here. Do you think that everyone should kit bash everything? Do you think you should kit bash a hero? Like, what's the scale here that you would consider? At what level, I guess, do you kit bash and convert?
It depends on how much what's there meets your vision. So I'm a terrible example. Everything in my city's army is converted somehow because I had a vision that didn't match the current model range. But if your vision is largely a Germanic city with your Zweihanders, with your handguns, and you like the poofy shirts, if that's your vision, there's nothing wrong with the fact that your vision matches what's currently available because you're in a perfect position. Your dream is already there to play out. You might just want to do a different head. So your general is slightly older, slightly more battle scarred. Just that touch that makes it more your vision than it already was.
Yeah, I agree, JP.
And sometimes it's not even that. Sometimes it could just be one small thing. You look at the stock model and you think that's almost perfect. There's something about that I don't quite like. A good example of this would be the Corvus Cabal Warcry warbands. The guy with the big outstretched wings. He has these strange sort of stilts. And I looked at it and I was like, this Warcry, this is incredible. All of these figures are perfect. Except those stilts. I'm not a big fan of the stilts. So
he's my Marilyn Manson. Like, he just reminds. If anyone likes Marilyn Manson, they would recognize. There was a time during Antichrist Superstar, the album, he would like have stilts, and I'm like, this is the Marilyn Manson model. but you were just like, I don't want that. Sorry, continue.
Oh, no, it's okay. But for me, because I tend to go super realistic with a lot of the conversions, for me, I was thinking, oh, he's going to fall over, isn't he? He's going to look like a right mug. He's going to turn up and he's going to fall flat on his face. So the first thing I did, yeah, exactly. So the first thing I did was I chopped off his legs and gave him some Zangor legs. But that was it. That was all I did with it. And it made a massive difference for me because it helped with my sense of immersion and helps with your internal narrative that you're playing with the game, I think.
Yeah, and you know, while I like my Marilyn Manson stilt wearing Crowe men, at the same time, like, you're right. Like, I was talking to the gentleman on just before we went live, and I was mentioning that I don't like the steampunk aspect. Sorry, not sorry. It's just not for me. It's not for me. And I remember when I was looking at my Tempest Eye, and I'm like, I really like this idea of Tempest Eye. I'd love to bring Kharadron Overlords into my army, but I don't want the steampunk. It's the steampunk look. It doesn't fit my army, and I've gone really hard on trying to recreate that Germanic puffy shirt, empire-y kind of feel. And I'm like, how do I create that with KO? And I'm like, halflings. And I looked at Blood Bowl and I'm like, I'm going to use Blood Bowl halflings, but with Kharadron Overlord flying bits. And should the AdMech stuff have come out earlier, I probably would have tapped into some of the great work that Leonardo from again, any Empire fan would remember Leonardo, the great inventor. He got the Birdman wings. So I would have found that in my space. But you're right. It's like, you've got an idea and bringing it to life, and I think there is this whole white space. It's very much like a sandbox where do as much as you want to. I think that's kind of the message that I want to bring out here, is that there is no right way to do this. It could just be a head swap. So my Phoenix Guard, for example, I head swapped them to make them human heads. I shaved off the gem that's on their little belly, and I did a little bit of work there to make them a little bit more human. But then you can go to the absolute extremes, and I'll bring up some of the examples from JP and Ricki, and you can just see the sheer amount of work. And they haven't just swapped a head; they've gone out and gotten 2, 3, 4 kits. They've used green stuff to model their own parts. You see people with Gargons where they kind of cut off their arms and, you know, they reposition them in ways they shouldn't be positioned, but then allows them with green stuff and putty and fill. They're able to then basically recreate the arm and have it in a way that it shouldn't be, or you wouldn't be able to do without the resource. But it's like, you have an idea, bring it to life how you want to bring it to life. And I think for me, that's where I'm going to ask you guys next about where do you get your inspiration from, and then I'll kind of show off some of your photos. I think that's like, I'm starting a new project, I've got an idea. How do you guys find your inspiration and your ideas for your works? I might start with JP first. Like, where do you start? Like, if I was starting a new army.
Well, for me, I think you can. There's a whole different range of places you can go. Artwork is always fantastic, but then you don't have to stick to just the official artwork. I find you can go on places like Pinterest and you can go off down a rabbit hole and you can find all sorts of weird and wonderful fantasy art that people have done. And just something like that will give you a small idea. And maybe it's just one picture, but then you run with it and you go with the theme and it can turn into a whole army. I think also things like films sometimes can be, maybe you're not thinking about modeling. It's quite, sometimes it's quite unusual in my case. I'm not thinking about converting things. But a good example of this would be I was watching The Lion King, of all things, The Lion King. And there's a scene where Rafiki's holding up baby Simba. I was thinking, oh, yeah, that would be a really good pose for a shaman, a Bray shaman, holding up the severed head of an Ungor that he's just chopped off. And sometimes it can come from the strangest little places, just little things like that.
Children's
Exactly. Corrupting.
I'm too excited, like singing the song, like do I know? Like, I'm doing the Circle of Life song, but you're looking at models going, mate, I want to convert. I love that. I love that. It's this. So movies is certainly one place that you're getting inspiration from. Ricki, what about yourself? Where do you find inspiration to hack up a model and do something special with it?
I'm at heart, I'm a child. If I can't think of ideas, I start to sulk. So my other half drags me around the Warhammer World Exhibition. We'll keep doing loops and loops and loops. And I'm looking for one model that will spark something in my head. And usually I'll find a model and I'll have an idea that's absolutely nothing to do with what it's actually there for. But like, I like that rough torso shape and I can probably do something with the left leg there and the sword. And once I've made a model, I can then start to build lore around it. And that lore will then lead to the next model, which leads to the next. And you have to work the entire ecosystem around the model. And then it grows into a faction or a concept or a unit. Which, yeah, I like bits. And then bits lead to stories.
I think for me, that's where I draw the most inspiration from. You know, I love movies, I love music, I love, art, and sometimes a simple Google image search can just spark so much inspiration where I want to look at, again, Gargants, for example. Gargants are fresh to my mind because that's the army that I'm currently building. But it's also the army that I'm currently thinking about. How do I make this my own? How do I make Gargants without a battle tome? But also, how do I make it my own? And for me, the process has certainly been with Gargants. I've searched other places where giants exist, whether it's folklore and the hill giants and raiding the villages, fee fi fo fum. It could be Dungeons and Dragons, and there is so much inspiration from. They've got frost giants, fire giants. You've got the hill giants. You've got stone giants. So it's like all of a sudden my world is like, wow, I could make a stone giant. What does a stone giant look like compared to a hill giant versus a frost giant? Then it's almost like, how do I then make my Gargant look like a frost Gargant? Or how do I make it a fire Gargant? And then it's almost like looking at this particular piece of model and going, how do I turn this into an idea? And I think the beautiful thing is there is no one way to do it.
Obviously, your own ideas will lead you to certain parts or certain materials. I mean, I did Gargants when AOS first came out. You could do anything, and everything was out up in the air. And I made a Gargant Shaman. I was like, well, he needs something that denotes his status, like bird's nest around the head. He had a crown. It was literally a bird's nest he'd ripped out of a tree, but it was roughly crown shaped. It was what was there, and it's the little things that you'll get a weird idea, and it will be a little personality piece that adds to it. And you'll start sourcing bits around that.
Yeah, absolutely. And, like there are just so many cool things you could possibly do. I think, where I guess the point here I'm trying to make is that, there are lots of ways to find your inspiration, whether it's the stories and the mortal realms, whether it's a concept that you found outside of Warhammer. I think that's a big one. Like I've looked at my Sylvaneth, for example, and I'm like, let's say my Sylvaneth came from the realm of whatever. Let's say metal. Let's say it was Shimon. How do I make my Sylvaneth metal? And that could simply be spray painted silver and gold. But then I could take that concept even further and say, well, what would also make it metal? What would my wildwoods look like? Is there other metally type things that I could kind of draw from? Or if it did look from the realm of metal versus the realm of life, is there other things that I could possibly do? And I think when I look at a project differently, that's where I can kind of draw the inspiration. And it's a struggle. I don't know what it's like for you guys, but I've probably spent hours upon hours upon hours looking at this one bloody gargant going, how do I turn you into my idea? And it's taken a long time to get to where I'm at. Yes, it sounds easy now that I'm going to go from a fire gargant or from the realm of Akshi, but like I looked at this gargant for a long time and I'm like, I want to do something with you, but I don't know how to do it. I just don't know how yet.
Starting is usually the hardest part for me. Eventually, so on your third, fourth gargant, you're going to know roughly where to clip, where the leg goes. You're going to have that confidence in the kit that builds up over every single time you do it. But that first model is the terrifying, like that first cut where you're like, I'm cutting him off at the knee. If this goes wrong, he's gaining a peg leg or nothing because I can't repose the leg at this stage. And it's the starting point is terrifying, where infinite potential for greatness or just a gargon that's missing his lower leg, and you'll gain confidence, you'll gain the joy of it, but starting can be terrifying.
I am definitely a coward when it comes to that first cut. I sit here for hours with blue tack. I think blue tack is probably the thing that I use the most when you're planning a new project, because you sit here with a bits box, you're like, this torso, I won't commit quite yet. I won't quite cut off the belt. I'll think about it. I'll try another torso. And you keep going with blue tack. And sometimes you can have things sat on the desk for weeks, if not months, in various stages of assembly, but purely with blue tack. Nothing's been cut. Nothing lines up properly. The torso's all weird and wonky, but you're sort of trying to build up the idea slowly, I think.
And it's cool because it's almost like Lego, right? Where with blue tack, you can add, and then you look at it, you take some photos, you're like, oh, it's not really looking like the way I wanted it to. And so I get a different part, or you then start looking at Games Workshop website to go, right, well, how do I bring this particular part to life? I'm doing it right now with. So I want to build some Scourge Runner chariots. But again, I'm a human and I want human version of it. And what I've done is I've gone out and got the old High Elf White Lion chariots. And the reason I've done that is because as I read the Soulbound RPG, I remember reading the stories about the Flamescar Peninsula, where they're these warrior women of Edessa, and they hunt down lions. Now, funnily enough, when I look at the map, my city is not far from the Flamescar Peninsula. So I'm like, instead of having a Scourge Runner chariot with horses or Drac, the little dragon kind of cav, why did I use lions? So all of a sudden, this idea, this one little story from Soulbound, not even about my city, that sparked an idea, and now I'm down this path of chasing down a 10-year-old model that doesn't exist. I need 3 of them. I've just sourced my 3rd one. It was easier than I thought, but it was that one little story from Soulbound that took me down a path, and now I'm super proud of it, and I've got these lions that I probably would have never gotten to if I wasn't thinking about it, exploring a different idea.
I think that's a good point, though, because finding the bits can sometimes be the most challenging thing. Maybe you're looking through something, that head would be fantastic for these 20 people, and you think, wait, you get one of this head in the kit. And then I think that's why bit sites, things like that, have started to make this sort of thing possible. Because previously, before there were bit sites, but I think they've started to become more competitive. And I think now it's possible to find the number of these particular heads that you're after, or the number of this particular weapon. Whereas I think that helps to make it a lot more common to see such customization.
Oh, when I was a kid, I could never go. I didn't have access to mail order either. I know when I look at the old White Dwarves game, you guys had access to ordering particular bits, and you could buy parts. As a kid, I lived in rural New South Wales, so I had a population of 10,000 people. I was about 9 hours from a capital city. I had no access to a Games Workshop or even the mail order service. All of a sudden, you're right, between eBay and third-party sales, and we'll talk about that very soon, but the world, you've now got a whole bunch of access to a whole bunch of stuff too. So, and we'll talk about some sites, and we'll talk about, I can see the chat's now, like frothing in the mouth, like, where do I get these parts? Like, where do I get more Chaos Halberds? And how do I get this? And like, what do I do? And we'll talk about that. But before we do, I just want to create some validity and show off why these two people here are absolutely the masters in their field. So I'm going to bring up a couple of images from each of the gentlemen. If you'd like to learn more, I will put their Twitter handles in the description of this episode, and you can go look at their work in however you want to look at it. But JP and Ricki, I'm going to show off a couple of your models. Maybe this would be an opportunity. So first off, I'm showing off JP's. JP, what am I looking at? Talk me through a little bit about the models, the process. Just give me your intro.
Yeah, so these are a couple of models I thought would be quite nice to look at today, because they show a couple of things that maybe people don't think about. So on the left, there's a Gorgon. So this is a Gorgon for my Beastmen army, Beasts of Chaos army. I need to stop calling them Beastmen. I'm stuck in the old one. But what we have is the Mongol body from Forge World with a head swap. And at that point you think, okay, if I had the money to buy things from Forge World to chop in half, fine, that's a different world. But the point here is that the legs are actually from a toy giraffe, and the stomach is made from a ping pong ball. So the point here is,
What?
Exactly. So the thing is, it doesn't always have to be these expensive parts, and you think, oh, this kit's good, but which other Games Workshop kit could I use for the bottom half? You don't have to limit yourself like that necessarily. I was looking at this and I said, okay, yeah, this would be a really cool torso for a big old terrifying Beastman, but there's nothing that's going to proportionally have the right size legs. And I mean, you could say, yeah, I'm sure there's a kit somewhere that would fit, but I was in a toy shop and there's this toy giraffe, and you think, well, why I could just use these, no problem. Add some green stuff and a few little accessories, and it's no problem. At that stage, I was thinking, oh, we need a big old belly as well, with some people screaming for help from the inside. And I was like, oh, I haven't got any big belly parts. What can I do here? And there's a ping pong ball in the corner of my room. And I was like, oh, look, cut that in half, stick that on, green stuff around the edges, and jobs are good. So that's kind of the point, really, is you don't have to limit yourself to the kits that Games Workshop provides. You don't have to even limit yourself to miniatures of any variety. Almost anything can be used in conversions like this. And that kind of leads quite nicely onto the picture on the right, which is the Spike Revenant that I've been working on recently. And this is just covered in natural gunk. It's got real moss for the hair, some bits of tea leaves for around the groin area. It's a real mishmash. This is sort of blurring the line between gardening and miniature making, I think.
I love it. That's crazy. The moss though, like, how will that work with painting though? Like, surely that would not take paint well?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. So in this particular case, this is before I primed it. So I primed it and it takes paint. It's fine. It works really well. You can paint over it. And for this, I was going for quite a natural, realistic look anyway. You're not going to be able to do your traditional 3 layers of highlights, but it doesn't really matter. For the overall effect, for tabletop, it's quite nice. Sometimes, though, you can sort of use these natural products if you're a bit savvy about it. So this same moss that I'm using as the hair here, I actually use it on lots of my bases as well. But if you use moss, you think, oh, it's going to go brown after about 2 weeks, isn't it? So it sounds slightly obscure, but what I do is I boil it up with glycerin and a little bit of green food dye, and it stays more or less intact. I've had some of the, for example, the Gorgon on the left is using some of it on the base, and that's been that color for what, 5 years now, something like that.
Wow. So like I'm partially speechless, but it just kind of shows you that your world is not restricted just to what Games Workshop produce in the warehouse. Like, as you've mentioned already, you've sourced models from the toy parts. You've used things naturally from your garden. You've used things from your kitchen, like tea leaves. You have used a ping pong ball. So So I guess, like if I'm thinking about what I'm trying, what I hope you're walking away with, folks, is to have an open mind and don't just be super focused in Games Workshop, because you will likely miss opportunities to bring something to the table, and again, bring something that's truly unique. What am I looking at now?
So this is almost the opposite end of the spectrum, really. I think for me, the biggest compliment that you can get if you're going to an event or going somewhere, and someone says to you, "Oh, where can I buy that? What company sells that?" And you say, "Oh, no, that's a conversion. It's all Games Workshop, but it's a conversion." I think that's the highest compliment as a kit basher, in my opinion. If something doesn't look like a conversion, I think that's the sign that it's a real success. For example,
when I look at those two bottles, JP, I think that I could buy them from Games Workshop. There is nothing there that looks like they're out of place. Like that looks.
And this is exactly the point, because you don't need green stuff. People say, "Oh no, I don't want to start converting because then I have to get into green stuff and it's a nightmare." And oh no, I can't do that. But the one on the left, there's no green stuff. That was, I wanted to show that one because it looks good, but it was just a case of being very careful with where you're cutting, planning very carefully where you're going to make the transition. So it's the majority of a normal Sister of the Watch, but with the legs from a Wood Elf from a Blood Bowl team and the head from a Wood Elf from the Blood Bowl team. But it looks like it's meant to be like that, but with no green stuff. That's the point.
So what I'm hearing as well is, so I mentioned, I've mentioned in a couple of episodes, and I mentioned to the guys before we went live, is my halfling, my Karajan overlords. I've drawn inspiration from the halflings as opposed to dwarves. So I've been going to my Blood Bowl kit, and I've been using that, and I've been converting and messing with those kits. But it's interesting because I'm seeing a lot of people using Blood Bowl again, something you wouldn't think about because you might only be focusing on the Age of Sigmar catalog. But I've seen some really cool uses of the Wood Elf kit. Even like there was one particular person I remember seeing holding up this this model, essentially like it's going to throw it, but because the Wood Elf kit is contorted and it's got so much movement, it just looks amazing. Let alone looking at 40k, and that kind of leads quite nicely to here because I recognize certainly some of those parts.
Yeah, so again, we've got Tyrannid parts, we've got the Tyrannid torso and arms, we've got the Daughters of Cain, what are they called, the snake ladies with the apron.
Yeah.
For the bottom of the torso, and then a bloodletter head. So
is that a bloodletter head? I've been trying to work out what that is. This reminds me of something from like Stranger Things. Like that is reminding me of Stranger Things.
It's probably not a coincidence. I think I made this maybe 3 weeks after I finished watching Stranger Things. So it probably is subconsciously, that probably did go in at some point. But yeah, it's a bloodletter head without the face. Makes a massive difference. It's got a kind of alien-esque vibe to it, I think.
That's freaking me out. That is, I never. What did you just green stuff the eyes? Yeah. Did you shave them off?
So no. So this was, I smoothed because the face is actually a separate part, and there's a small ridge where it normally connects. But if you take a scalpel, you could probably do it without any green stuff. You could probably just smooth it down, maybe with a file. I did put a tiny bit of green stuff over on this one, but you don't need to. Again,
that's crazy. This is freaking me out. That is alien and scary, and I love it. And we'll talk more about how you got to that point, but I just wanted to show off some of your amazing talents and kind of show why you guys are just amazing. Then this is where we pass the baton over to Ricki. So Ricki, talk me through your craziness. And again, on both of their Twitters, you can find more of their art. I would highly recommend you follow, you like, and you go check out all the imagery they've put up. But Ricki, take us through some of the photos that you've shared.
So it should say unofficial on the picture on the left-hand side in big writing. I'll just say it now.
So this battle tome was what stopped Lumineth, basically, is what you're telling us, is that this official release stopped the Lumineth from
no
coming
one cares
out this
about
week.
elves. It's fine. It's an unofficial, fan-made, in no way GW sponsored battle time. I've got the disclaimer out there now. I've covered myself. Apart from the logo, which is done in sheer reverence to the company. Nailed that one. The model on the right is my Midnight Queen. I had a story kind of in my head when we found out about the Storm Vaults, that obviously Sigmar put things in there, things he didn't necessarily agree with, things he didn't want around. What if one of the prisoners kind of broke out somehow, but tried to refix the original Enlightenment engines? You know, it was originally his thing that gave great knowledge, and she's a bit feeble, a bit broken at the moment, so she built her own reclamation engine, which makes her insanely intelligent and does nothing for anyone around her. So to represent that, I had to take apart the Penumbral engine and literally rebuild it myself as she would have rebuilt her own reclamation engine and wedge her in the middle of it, which is Saint Celestine with the head from the named Sister of Silence, who I will never remember her name. I want to say Crowe, but I can't be certain on that one. And then lots of bodyguards around her.
I love it. And it's interesting. You've got the Penumbral engine. When I look at this, it doesn't scream Sisters of Battle. And it's great that you're able to draw parts from 40k and make it your own, whether it's through color scheme, whether it's through drawing other parts. This doesn't not look Age of Sigmar, but it also doesn't look like it's a 40k. And I think that's one of the fine lines when you're drawing inspiration from another model range. You could just look too 40k, or it could look like it doesn't fit in the world. But I think you found that balance really nicely.
It's somewhere between the gothic, low-tech sci-fi of 40k and the sort of weirdness of AOS, where you can bridge them in that little line in the middle, which... I mean, the Penumbral engine arguably looks the most sci-fi thing there, despite being pretty much the only AOS component involved in the conversion.
And for me, like when people start talking about, and I remember seeing, some of the outcry about Vince Venturella's Tempest Eye models, and it's interesting because I disagree completely with the comments here. And is there technology in Age of Sigmar? Absolutely. When I think about Warhammer Fantasy Battles, in the Empire, for example, there was a city of Nuln, and the city of Nuln was the technology city. And they were doing some crazy stuff back in the Warhammer Fantasy Battle days. It's hard to imagine that the evolution and the sheer amount of years that have passed since Warhammer Fantasy Battles to today couldn't lead to something like this in the mortal realms somewhere. Like, there has to be somewhere in the mortal realms that something that is high fantasy, high tech lives. And that's why we have Courage and Overlords and we accept it. And this is why I can absolutely see this. And I think you've done a great job when it comes to pulling 40k parts into Sigmar.
Cheers. I like the kits, and obviously a lot of the cities kits, well, there are no city kits. We didn't get that new swath of kits, so it's finding the bits you can pull across that are newer kits. And
so I brought up another picture, like this, more like a family photo of yours.
So that is, at the front, we've got my lovely lady who wins me awards at tournaments. She has a name, but that's what I call her. She's my Vendati executioner. She's a clockwork witch hunter who used technology and their general wiles to assassinate wizards, purely on the basis that there was a necroquake, magic's unstable, and someone had to be blamed. And we all know people like finding someone to blame. And she decided it's all wizards' faults. There's too much magic around. They're going to trim it back slightly, and she's good at what she does. Behind her, we've got some... I'm struggling to see my own photo. My crossbows and my halberdiers, who, if I'm running an official event, are Free Guild Guard of Halberds and crossbowmen, and the rest of the time they've got their own unique scrolls because they're definitely wearing more armor than a 5-up or a 6-up save. So they rock a 4-up and their own personal steam pikes when playing narratively, which is sort of, it's the aim was to build something that can be Cities of Sigmar. It can go to an event and be a Free Guild Guard or a crossbowman, but can also play narratively where they play the way they look. There is a man in heavier armor. It is a fancier looking weapon than the man in poofy shirt with the halberd. And at the back is my weird science, which is a Venturian Reclaimer, which is a giant mining laser. using Skaven Reclaimed Warpstone, or it's a Luminarch for go to tournament because he's got a giant thing on top that looks like it'll fire a beam forwards, and it loosely fits the scroll. If the scroll goes Vague War Machine with laser cannon on top, it fits that enough that it's tournament legal whilst also having its own story.
Yeah, that's great, and I think, and we'll talk about tournaments in a minute because I do really want to talk about tournaments. But the fact that you've gone above and beyond and written your own war scroll, and some tournaments won't accept it; they'll want you to play, the traditional. And it's great that you're able to port this into the Cities of Sigmar. But and narrative gaming is becoming more and more accepted, and people are more and more creating these narrative events. The Neo community are putting on more events, so it's great that you're able to kind of bring your own story to life, but also at the same time, you can still play with this at a tournament.
Maximizing the use for the models, which, I mean, some of the models cost a lot of money to build in the end. So if I can take them to a proper event and I can take them to a narrative event as well, and I can spend my time writing about them as well, it looks nice.
And what's cool about narrative events as well is that they're not locked in with points too. So some narrative events will have points to kind of create like a power level. Some narrative events won't. And you're able to balance the power level or the storytelling in different ways. So I'm sure you'll have some ideas and some feedback for your custom war scrolls as well. Like, how do you bring that to life at a gaming table? Because I imagine, like, if I've got a whole bunch of handgunners with better armor, they wouldn't be the traditional 100 points that Cities of Sigmar have illustrated. So I'm sure there's plenty of ways around that.
Yeah, so I mean, it's everything I do, I strive for balance. So nothing narrative is designed to be better. It's designed to be different than, because you don't want 100-point crossbows or 100-point crossbows who have a better save. It's just not. The models are designed to reflect the story, and the scrolls are designed to reflect that same story. And currently up, we have the first model for my city, which is the Ironsworn Templar, which I was watching a lot of people lamenting the lack of knights in Age of Sigmar. So I thought, if with Age of Sigmar bigger and grander, a knight on a horse doesn't really fit in necessarily as well as it did. So he's strapped to a giant walking steam tank, essentially. He can almost be eye to eye with a tree lord, because if there's monsters stomping around and you want to look your enemy in the eye, you need to get a bit of a leg up, which he has in a giant weird walker. And then my halfling gyrocopters, because everyone loves a halfling.
Oh, I love my halflings.
But I love a halfling. And the bomb strapped underneath, because whilst the copters naturally have theirs buried in the back, I like the visual representation of the bomb. Some have dropped more, some have dropped less, but we can tell who's doing well and who's doing badly in that squadron.
I like it. And these are just a couple of ideas that I'm absolutely loving that you've brought to life. A simple idea that you've literally just ended us off with. You can show by the amount of bombs on the gyrocopter who's doing well and who is not. That, without even doing anything, is telling a story, and I think that's beautiful.
Cheers.
All right, let's get into the meat and potatoes of this episode, because we've kind of now shown off, what you guys can do and how you guys have got there. Let's break it down. So, first things first, how do you source bits? Now, this is like opening Pandora's box. So JP's already alluded to, he's looked at his kitchen, he's looked at his ping pong table, he's looked at other model ranges, he's looked at his garden. Cool. Where else do you get bits? So, Ricki, I'll go to you first. Oh, no, go JP. JP being a little bit quiet. JP, where do you source bits?
So, well, I have a tendency to buy kits for the smallest little thing. Sometimes you buy a kit and you say, that left arm would be really good. As a result, I then have quite a big bits box of almost entire sets of things that you can then dip into later on. And
you're clearly not paying Australian prices, by the way.
Not playing it. No. In fact, I've recently moved to Spain, so I'm now paying European prices, which are more painful than when I was living in the UK. So I'm starting to feel this a bit more now that I'm living here. But compared to Australia,
my heart bleeds for you. Put it this way: when I went to play Blood and Glory a couple of years ago, two start collecting boxes was the price of one. So I basically bought 4 boxes, and I basically paid two at home. So it's like buy one, get one free. And that's how I justified it to my wife. But this is not a complaining about prices. This is about where do you source your bits. So you buy some. So one place you can do it is go buy a kit and go buy an arm.
The alternative, of course, is to sculpt things. So sometimes I make things entirely from green stuff. But the problem with that is it tends to be for bespoke things, for painting projects, for display pieces. If you're doing an entire army, it tends to get prohibitively time costly. You can spend 10 hours and you've got your 5 arms. It's not really going to be viable. So sometimes it's just finding alternatives. Having a bits box is a good source for me. And this is the thing, over the course of years they build up. You think, I've only got 2 or 3 extra bits from that kit, but over a few years they do build up.
Ricki, yourself, where do you source bits from?
I spend far too much at Warhammer World. So I live in Nottingham. It's pretty fun to go there. So whenever I make anything, the key requirement is it's all self-made or GW or Forge World. Because if I'm going to play, I'm definitely playing at Warhammer World because it's got fancy tables and fancy army needs fancy tables. So I will go through every room there. I mean, the exhibition loves me because I'm there a lot. And you'll find, like I say, buy a kit for that one head. I bought some Atalan Jackals, so I wanted one for a Goliath to pose on for my Necromunda, which somewhere down the line, the rest of those heads have now gone on the new AdMech flyers because I had heads with goggles on that suitably fitted the collection. But the bits box builds, but if you start a project and go, I'm going to need 500 halberds, you're going to go insane trying to find them. But if you go, I need some halberds there, and then the kits that give me the halberds is giving me some heads I can put on the riders over there, and do it a kit at a time, you'll find your bits box filled up with the bits for the next thing, and you're looking for combinations will then build it for you. I also trawl eBay, which is the easy one, because I have a great memory, but only specifically relating to Warhammer kits. The rest of the time, I'm useless, but I could tell you I wanted the Empire Lances and I wanted that one wonky-looking Bretonian hat. So I will sit there and go through various search terms, and you either get sellers that you know you'll buy from again, or you'll just trawl through the auction to look for something that ultimately the kit's not worth much, but it has that head you want. So you'll get it dirt cheap.
So being a tight-ass Australian, and again, I can't refinance my house for the 4th time every time Games Workshop brings out an army. So I'm with you. eBay is definitely a great place. I've got a couple of websites that I go to often because there are third-party sites, places like bitsandsKits.co.uk, I think it is, bitsbox.co.uk. There's just 2 examples of websites that sell and break down parts. So if you're just looking for that one head, like the other day, I actually bought a whole bunch of Gargan bits because I'm like, I want to convert my Gargans. What am I going to do? So I went to the Ogre range and I bought, the big cannon from the scrap launcher. Oh, scrap launcher? Like there's a cannon, big cannon. And then there were like I basically went into a whole bunch of random parts and bought the Gorgon stone that like they're going to throw, right? So went to the Gorgon kit and I got a couple of things from the Gorgon kit. Then I went into, got a whole bunch of Demigryph Knight shields because I want to put more shields on them. So I was able to go and buy, and basically for the price of one particular kit, I was able to get a whole bunch of specific parts to my models. So eBay's great. There are third-party sites like that. Speaking of third-party sites, so one thing that I did recently was I converted my Shadow Warriors from Empire Archers. The reason I wanted to do that was 1, Archers are no longer in the game, but 2, my idea of Shadow Warriors were basically an invisibility spell from Hallowheart as opposed to being Shadow. So I painted them up like an invisibility spell, very blues and very whites kind of invisible. Almost like the old Dungeons and Dragons cartoons and how they kind of show that off. But there are third-party sites that all they do is they build little resin parts. And I was able to find like some, like they were called Brotherhood heads. Essentially, they're just like hooded, cloaked heads for humans. And I head swapped that. So there are so many places out there. Another piece of advice, again, being a tight ass Australian, is I will bit swap. So I'll ask my friends, and Ben Spinetti, a good friend of mine, we swap parts all the time. So I traded him a whole bunch of, I can't remember what I gave him, but he gave me a whole bunch of the fish that come with the deepkin, around the bases. I wanted some of the fish for a different project. So you can swap either on Facebook groups or with your friends. And I don't know about the conventions that you guys go to, if you have conventions, but they often have people who sell old models, and often people will put their bits in a bits box, and they'll sell the bits box or little containers of bits boxes for like $5, and you don't know what you're getting, but there's always random parts, and you might not need it right away, but you use them eventually.
Yeah. And all of this is before you even start talking about 3D printers. I'm still holding off because I still can't quite justify it to my partner. But one day I'm going to buy one, and I think that's going to open Pandora's box for sure.
Well, at minimum, there are people who will commission out 3D printed models. So I don't have a resin printer. I have the filament printer, so it's really good for terrain, not really good for miniatures. But I've got plenty of friends who have a 3D printer for resin, and I can find a file. There's free websites like Thingiverse, or there are people who will commission your piece of work. And if you had something specific in mind, you could then get that file, go to your 3D printing friend or business, and they'll print them, and they're not expensive. So, that's I guess that was a couple of ideas. Any other ideas you guys have when it comes to sourcing items?
It's interesting you were mentioning the bit sites, actually, because one thing I spend too much time on bit sites. But one of the things you mentioned is sometimes you can go on a website like that, and maybe you need an axe, for example. Maybe you type axe into the search bar, and you get all of these weird and wonderful axes that you completely had forgotten about. And you're like, oh yeah, there's that one from the Fire Slayers. Oh yeah, you could have a Fire Slayer axe. Little things like that. Sometimes even just search bars on bit sites are quite a good little tip, because the other problem is them being in stock. Because sometimes you want something and you can't find it for love nor money. But sometimes if you're looking for a pouch or an accessory or something like that, just to disguise a gap that you were going to fill with green stuff, or maybe you weren't, whatever. But you can just type in pouch or accessories into bits and kits, for example, and you'll get all these different things. And maybe there's the ones that people instantly think of are all sold out, but maybe there's one or two kits that are a bit more niche and people haven't thought to go to that part of the website. I shouldn't have told everyone that now, because that's my trick, but
I find Facebook groups are really handy as well. I know in Australia, and I'm sure it's irrelevant across the world, is that Australia, for example, has a buy, swap, and sell. So I can go out there and say, hey guys, I'm looking for X. And people will sell me their bits box parts for, actually, funnily enough, people are actually really nice. There's been plenty of people that have said, look, you can have the part, just pay me postage. Or give me $1 or $2 and you can have it. So they're very, very kind. But then there are other groups that'll basically say they're purely only for trading. So people will put their things up and say, I'm looking for this. What have you got? And you can do a bit of a bits box exchange as well. So, and I know some conventions actually even have that set up where people will have their bits box on the table, and you can go up there and you can either buy from it or you can trade. So, again, sourcing parts doesn't have to mean buying a whole kit. There are lots of ways you can break it down and find something that you need without spending a lot of money. Do you guys have any favorite kits that you draw from?
I do, for example. I have a bit of a love affair with three kits in particular. I really like the Corsair kit. And it's bizarre because I've never built any Corsairs ever. But I seem to use their swords on everything. Anything that's even remotely chaotic and it needs a sword, my go-to is the Corsair swords. I think for me, because I quite like things to be more realistically proportioned, they're quite nice because they're designed for elves. If you put them in the hand of a Bestigor, they look like it makes the Bestigor look intimidatingly large, and it almost looks like a butter knife in their hand. It's quite impressive. But yeah, I use the Corsair kit quite a bit.
So yourself, any parts that you draw from, any kits in particular?
Cawdor for me. The bodies are fantastic for any poor man in any game. weird little legs that have been cut off. They've got a weird mechanical foot in the kit. The heads are the perfect creepy human heads. So my Sisters of the Watch, where they're kind of indoctrinated witch hunters, the masks, the pointy noses, they look like a weird cult. And even the weapons, some of them can pass for a suitably rudimentary low-tech pistol. Because Corsair aren't great tech in Necromunda. They're arguably not great tech in Age of Sigmar either. So barring clearly advanced stuff, it's got weapons, it's got heads, it's got torsos that can all donate to multiple different kits. So it will just stock your bits box for you, which I love.
And it's funny you say that, because recently, my most recent purchase was Corsair crossbow. So Ash McEwen in my community has done this amazing Cities of Sigmar flagellant kind of army, and just to complement that, he has used the Corsair kit. And I was mentioning earlier my Scourge Runner chariots, they have a harpoon, and Ash had basically said, why don't you use the big crossbow? It's like a really big crossbow, as opposed to a small crossbow. It's like, why don't you use that as your harpoon launcher? And I'm like, that's brilliant, that's such a great idea. So I've now sourced some of those bits. So again, we've got Necromunda, we've got Blood Bowl, we've got 40k, we've got Age of Sigmar, we've got literally I've been looking at some other models. It is quite hard when you look at other particular companies, because traditionally they don't do so. Age of Sigmar is almost a 32 mil game as opposed to 28 mil. So if I looked at, let's say, my Lord of the Rings versus Age of Sigmar, there is a size difference, so it makes it hard to port things over. Same is true with like Malifaux or any other game, but there are some things you can draw upon if you are confident or cheeky, or you've got some skills.
Yeah.
It's also true if you just want little people, it works quite well. I've got the wood elves from the Hobbit. I use them as little forest sprite things for my Age of Sigmar games, and they work quite well. If you want little people, it works quite well.
By the way, those things are priceless. If you can find the little things, like go into the Dryad kit and get the little owls, or get the little dragons from the Medusa kits, and those things alone, the little crows that go on shields and things. But I think again you can source your kits and your parts from anywhere, and I think hopefully we've got a few ideas. So we've talked a little bit about like how do you plan your project. So you guys have kind of alluded to, you look at a model, you draw inspiration from a book, a story, a song, something that's happening outside in the world. You start with a particular model, maybe, or a concept. You build it out. How else do you plan out a project? Do you have everything you need from the get-go, or is it something that kind of you build as you go? Like Ricki, how did you build out the Midnight City?
I built one walker, and it was a steam walker, which meant the infantry looked very low tech. So the sort of Germanic ones that were starting out, they didn't fit with the walker anymore. So I took from 30k originally to make bits of the walker. So I looked at 30k range, and Solar Auxilia are the perfect steampunky infantry. They've got a big thing strapped to their back. They're in boiler suits. They got armor plates over them, and I started with a kit of them. I bought a Pistoliers box. So it's got the suitable like fancy hats on. It's got some pistols that went off to the corridor to become some artillery crew over there. So I built the universe around the initial model, and he then lent inspiration and context to every other model that had to be around him. If your knight is a man strapped to a giant steamwalker, your basic infantryman is probably a bit more armored than the pretty much cloth armored men in the other armies. But the laborers who built the sort of steamwalker, they're in the ragged clothes of the corridor because they only exist to service the noblemen who got it there. They're not rich, they're not wealthy, they just exist to make him reach battle. And I universe build around the first model, and that then leads into the rest of the models.
So it's not like you sat down and said, right, I'm going to buy all these parts, here's my 2,000 point army, and this is what I'm going to do with this, and this is what I'm going to do with this, and this is what I'm going to do with this. It's something that you started off with an idea, you built it out, and then just that kind of inspired and fueled you and brought new ideas to life. Because I imagine this Midnight City doesn't look like, so what you've got today did not look like what you started with when you very first put your first model together.
it's changed. It's only changed slightly, and AOS is a progressive setting. The time has changed in game for when I first started as well. We've had a Necroquake, we've got Bone Reapers. The story has changed as well. It's not a static setting. So my newer stuff's a bit sleek in the old stuff. I've had my own lore has changed slightly. They've been under siege. They've had a reason to build this new stuff. And like Jon was saying earlier, I build models. I don't necessarily build army stuff. If I build a model, I have an idea, I build a story, and then at the end, I will try and wedge them on the right base to count as something in the game. The story and the model is the important part. The game is just so I can grow the story with... Because if I write every battle, eventually I'm going to become biased. I'm going to say, they won, they were awesome, they keep going and going and going. I'm a terrible game player. So if I want them to lose a battle, I'll play it out on the table. And I can guarantee you I will lose that battle. But the little bits in it, so his walker got broken. So the next one, the dwarves are inside the walker. They don't want to get impaled in the front. They know to get in it, not strapped to the front of it. So the games will then let me build my models. And I build models. I also happen to play games, but I definitely build models primarily.
So if you were a tournament organizer, so if you were a tournament player, you certainly want to have that in mind. Obviously, Ricki, you're playing more narrative, or your primary focus is narrative. Not to say that it's not competitive.
I've turned up. I've lost at a lot of tournaments, if that's any comfort. It's knowing the type of gamer you are as well. So I went to a tournament with my lovely converged army that I'd wedged in the right bases, and then I sulked when I came in like the bottom 10. And I was like, well, I built models and kind of fitted them into a list, but I didn't build a tournament list. So measure your expectations in terms of the modeling and in gaming based on where you fit on that spectrum.
That's definitely true. I did almost an identical thing with my Beastmen army. I built things saying, "Oh, that looks good. We'll make a few of those." I had lots of Gors, and competitively, Gors are not the way to go at the moment from the Beast of Chaos book. So I had this lovely army, and it was absolute garbage on the table.
Just play for painting prizes, painting and modeling prizes. That's what you go to a tournament for.
Which is important. I probably work the other way. I probably go, right, I'm building a tournament list. How do I build that in? So for Cities of Sigmar, for example, I knew that I was going to play Hallowheart when I went to CanCon, or Tempest Eye when I played at South Australia GT. And I'm like, I want to bring in a gunstock gun hauler. Cool. How do I make that model in my narrative? So I'm almost like going the complete opposite. I guess again, there's two ends of the spectrum. JP, how do you plan out and prepare a project?
So I'm actually very, very impatient when it comes to these things. So I'm actually trying to be better at this. I mentioned I was starting a Cities of Sigmar army. I'm trying a Living City one, and I'm trying to do this differently. I've got a little PowerPoint, and I've got the units I want. I've got it so it's vaguely competitive, and I'm going to try and build it according to this list. I mean, I failed already. I'm on the third miniature, and I've already started building Spike Revenants, which are not necessarily bad, but it wasn't on my original list. But I'm trying to say, okay, right, I need this, and X, Y, and Z. These are the kits I'll need to do it. Probably, I will incorporate various things from the bits box later on. But in general, I must admit, I don't do that. In general, I tend to be a bit impatient and say, oh, that's a cool idea. What have I got already? Blue tack, blue tack, blue tack. Oh no, that doesn't work. Blue tack, blue tack, blue tack. I'm not going to wait for anything else. Let's continue to combine existing bits until it looks vaguely okay. In fact, my Lord of Change that looks a little bit like an owl is a really good example of that, because that was I was like, oh, I really want to build a Lord of Change. So I bought the Lord of Change kit, and I was like, oh, I want it to have an owl face. So I had this concept of I want it to be this creepy owl. And I thought, but I'm not going to wait for any of the parts. I could I could go to my favorite toy shop and buy a toy owl and chop the head off. But I resisted. And actually, the end result was using parts that are only from the Lord of Change kit. There's absolutely no other bits from any other kits in there at all. It is purely green stuff and parts from that same kit used in a different configuration. It's sometimes it's being impatient is a terrible, terrible thing.
Is that process always the same? Like, do you guys always go through this same step of building a first model and then letting it kind of evolve, or like what you guys have shared? Or does a project start differently no matter like for me, for example, I mentioned that I had a list in mind and I try to fit it in and I source parts, and then like that's just one process. But recently, you're right, with the Scourge Runner, I've used Luedtke to do things. With the Gargants, I've been reading stories, and then I've been looking at this model going, right, where do I cut it? Where are the joints? So I'm personally doing different things for different projects, but you guys are the professionals. Do you guys always have the same process, or do you jump around?
I'm not good at waiting, as Jon said. It's the impatience gets you. So if I have an idea, that idea is probably happening within the week I've had it. So the Admech Cavalry have been painful for me because I had the idea when we first saw them, and I've had a bits box on my shelf waiting marked for them. So I actually planned that one, but only because I physically couldn't get access to the kit to build them. But with the first Walker that showed off, I got the Iron Circle. I'd never used a Dremel before. My other half was on standby in case I impaled myself with it. And rather than planning out, it was wedged in the vise. I was like kind of poking it with the drill bit. Like, it's going to be hollow through the chest. It's going through. I was like, if I wreck it, then it's going to be rubble on something's base. Yeah, it'll get used somehow. But I knew where I wanted it to get. And I didn't have the patience or necessarily the self-control to work out how I was getting there. I was like, it's going to be hollow and I've got a drill bit attached and the two will work somehow together. And it did come together. It came together very well. But if I try and replicate that a second time, my second Walker is the one I hate the most because I was trying to revisit an old idea. It wasn't new inspiration. It was trying to repeat myself, which I really struggle with.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. You're a man near and dear to my heart. I lack so much patience. As excited I was for that AdMech release with the flying dudes, I couldn't wait, so I just went in and found my own way. JP, your process, does it vary, or do you have like a structured, like I do this, then I do this, then I do this?
It's very much what Ricky's saying, really, is if you try and make it too formulaic, it all sort of falls to pieces. If you think, oh, this worked really well on the previous one, I'll just copy what I did last time. Sometimes, I don't know, maybe it's a slightly, in the same unit, you're trying someone with a slightly different pose. Maybe it doesn't quite work. The pieces don't line up in the same way and the legs are facing in a different angle. I think each one, you have to take the overall idea and think, okay, but this particular one, this has a slightly different set of parameters. There's a couple of different things I need to think about here. What extra little pouch or what extra little bit of chain or what extra bit of fur pelt am I going to add on here to make it look like that particular miniature is complete and not like it's trying to copy the good idea that I had last week, if you know what I mean.
So what I'm hearing is that it's the process changes and you guys adapt quite often. Yeah. Because I think the thing that I've learned the most is that it never goes to plan. Sometimes the bits just don't fit. They're too big. They're too small. You've got to shave something down. You had an idea and you try something else and it worked better than your original concept. Ricki, you said it. Things evolve and you learn, you adapt, you get new tools, and you try things and they either work or they don't work. So I think converting a kit bashing is this constant evolution of learning and applying new techniques.
It's also about the confidence that you're going to mess up. Something is going to go wrong. I mean, fortunately, I didn't impale myself on a Dremel, but I was prepared for that at least. But if you're not willing to fail at it, you're not going to try. You're going to do something very safe that in the end, it might not match your vision at all. So the worst thing is to make something and have it end up as nowhere near your vision. So close or I tried is great, but if you build something that you don't necessarily love, you're not necessarily going to paint it that well either, because the whole time you're thinking this is not where I wanted to be. I didn't take that chance or get that perfect head that I was waiting for. And you've got to love what you do, especially when you put a lot of money into these things. You have to love it. And I love building things. I love wasting money on these things. And if I ruin it, I'll love smashing it up on a base. I'll take out my frustration. It will become rubble somewhere.
So you're leading me to exactly where I wanted to ask you. And JP, were you going to say something?
No, I was just going to say one thing you can do to avoid that kind of because that first cut is always the terrifying bit. Is you can do things with Photoshop or even just PowerPoint if you're slightly lower tech like me, is you can see roughly what something's going to look like beforehand. You find the various pictures of the different kits, you put them all together in a horrible collage, make it all black and white, and you get a rough idea of what something's going to look like at the end. And sometimes you think, oh, no, that looks horrible. But I'm not even going to try. I'm not even going to get the cutter and the scalpel out the drawer. It's not worth it.
And Tristan Gray has joined the chat. He is another absolute legend when it comes to kit bashing and converting, and he's saying that Ricki now only has 8 fingers. I was going to ask you about tools, but before we talk to tools, I think we've kind of danced around this concept of failing. So one, people have a fear of failing. When I look at my Gorgon, I don't want to waste $100 kit. If I make the wrong cut, I don't want to throw it in the bin and kind of start again. Or I'm scared that I do something wrong and it doesn't kind of go their way, and that might stop people from converting and kit bashing. What are your thoughts around, I guess, quote unquote failing when you make the wrong cut, JP? And it doesn't work to plan. What do you do? Is the model salvageable? Like, how do you kind of pivot and then kind of find a new way to do the model? Like, what happens when you fail?
Well, this is the nice thing about everything being physical, is it's actually very easy to take things off again. I know sometimes people go, oh, you've applied glue, that's the end, that's the be all and end all. But you can still cut legs off after you've glued them on. You can still remove things, even with green stuff. If you put on some green stuff and it looks terrible, if you're resilient enough, you can peel it back off again, and you can more or less get it off. I think a lot of the time I'm probably a bad person to ask, because I actually have a graveyard of conversions they're not failed necessarily. I've just run out of enthusiasm for them, and they sit there, and occasionally parts get salvaged for other projects. But I think that's the point: is you can reuse things. Everything that you buy in the future, you will use that amazing head that you bought for one project. You will use that amazing weapon that you got for something. All of it is so modular that you'll find a use for it eventually, be it in 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years.
Ricki, anything you'd add to that?
Failing happens. I mean, there's no nice way of putting it. Sometimes you do fail at things. I'd love to be great at everything. I can't sculpt properly. I can gap fill like a pro, but the reason I know most GW bits now is because I can't make that arm, so I will find that arm. But if something fails, if anyone follows me on Twitter, I occasionally give away my failed projects. If I've lost love for it, if I don't have that spark of inspiration anymore, if it sits on my shelf, I'm going to feel bad every time I look at the model. And sometimes it's best just to say, I'm drawing a line under it, it can go away. It helps that we aren't paying $100 for Gorgon here, which, is less painful when that happens. But I enjoy building things. And if at the end of the build, I don't have a finished model, I've still spent probably a good 5-6 hours sat at the desk minimum making it. And movies cost more than some of the models that I've ruined. So I've got my joy out of it. If you don't enjoy building, failing is probably worse because you've gone through that chore and you've ended up with nothing. But I enjoy being a mad scientist sat here with green stuff, brass rod, glue, bit of wire in the corner, and I'll keep slamming it together. And eventually, if it runs out, I've been like a kid with Play-Doh. At the end of it, they get nothing, but they get the joy of doing it. And if you enjoy what you're doing, then even if you fail, you spent a lot of time having a lot of fun.
As Marek Wolf in the chat's also said, I think I couldn't have said it any better. He said the only way to ruin a model is if you melt it. If things don't go your way, you can always use it somewhere else, whether it's for basing, whether it is if I was to cut off my Gorgon leg and the leg didn't go to plan, maybe I get a peg leg, maybe I go and try something completely different, and it leads me down this path of pirate Gorgon. Who knows? But being open and adapting, I think, is critical to this. And there's been plenty of projects that I've started that didn't go to plan, but have come out amazingly, and something that's unique and special and different that I probably couldn't replicate again because these accidents kind of just led me down this weird path and I went with the wind.
Spontaneous inspiration.
Love that. What tools do you guys use? So we've kind of talked already about some of the. So Ricki, you mentioned Dremel. That's something that I've only recently purchased for my hobby. Can't believe it's taken me this long to buy Dremel. What are some of the tools that you guys use? So Dremel is one. When do you use it? How do you use a Dremel?
I'm not a technical person, so I have a Dremel. It's not been used in a while because last time I used a sanding tip, it fired off and whacked me in the forehead, which I was so fortunate it wasn't a blade or a drill that I'm terrified of my Dremel currently. So it's there. I've got razor saws of various sizes because I might need to get inside for a bit. I have a mold line remover. I'm not entirely certain how to use it because I use a knife more often than that because it's a knife. I know how to use the knives. Clippers. I have gouged a fairly healthy chunk of models of clippers because if I only want the left leg, the rest, unless I intend to use it, I can carve away quite easily rather than doing delicate cuts. I'm a terribly impatient person. Brass rod. I order far too much brass rod off eBay. Various sizes, either to pin the models or to be the halves of spears or axes. So I've got clippers I use specifically for the brass rod.
I've never used brass rod. I always use paperclip. I just buy I just use.
Clip.
Pardon?
For a half of a spear, you can't use a paper clip.
No. But like for pinning, for example, I'll use a paper clip and I'll just cut that down and glue. So brass rod's something that I haven't used yet, but that's a good tip.
And glue. Make sure you're always stocked on glue because not everything's gonna be plastic. Which means if you don't have super glue in the drawer, you're gonna get halfway through a conversion and then stew while you wait for someone to get you glue somehow. Which in lockdown is particularly challenging.
And I've learnt recently as well. There's like a fastener as well. There's super glue fastener that you can kind of spray, and then it makes it glue even faster. So I'm sitting there for 1,000 hours trying to pin and hold these two pits together.
There's some that cut it down to about half a second, and you think, is that really necessary? Is the 3 seconds of my life really that precious that I can't wait that long?
Definitely.
Ricki, before I move to JP, any thickness you use for your rods? 25 or 40 mil models. Is there any particular one that you need to lean towards?
Double check. I believe it's either 12 or 15 millimeter, which is roughly Stormcast half of a sword size. It's the current one that's through my halberdier's hands. Because halberds are hard to source, but Vanguard axes from Stormcast and brass rods are cheap.
Good tip. JP, what tools do you use?
A very similar kind of range of things, really. What would I add? As well, if you start moving towards green stuff type of things, you'll want some tools for that as well. Dentistry tools are quite good for working with green stuff. But I also tend to use, to be honest, some of them, though, are a bit unnecessary. You see these kits and they say, oh, here's your 20 different tools that you'll need if you're working with green stuff. I think I did buy it. Of course, everyone buys it, and I end up using about 2 of them, I think, in the end. But I regularly just use toothpicks or drawing pins or whatever I have to hand that looks roughly the right shape for the impression I'm trying to make. In addition, clay shapers. If you're working with green stuff, trying to get a nice smooth finish on it, clay shapers, they're normally used for arts and crafts for people who work with clay, but they're really nice for smoothing out details, and you can get the pointed ones, you can get the ones with flat ends. I use them a lot. What else? I also use model chain. Model chain in various different sizes is quite nice for disguising gaps, edges. You can use it on almost anything. A little bit of super glue, and you can get it into some nice organic shapes as well that make it look a bit more authentic. Yeah.
A few other things that I use. One that I've gotten more comfortable with over time is a thing called blue stuff. So I mentioned with my Phoenix Guard, I shaved off their belly. They have like a gem. It's very high elf, very elven gem. And I'm like, if I don't get rid of this, I know it's going to not allow me to do what I want to do. And there was this particular part in the Flagellant kit, which is like this little comet. It's like a little sigil, and it's just a double blazed comet, like the two-tailed comet. And I'm like, how on earth do I source 30 of these from a kit that almost nobody has? And I'd use blue stuff to replicate it. So basically blue stuff is like an insta mold, and you press it down, and I use a bit of green stuff or a bit of resin, and I could copy this little piece. Now, do I suggest you go and copy a whole model? No, it's not that good. But when you're trying to do something like an impression, or I wanted to get the so on the Hurricanum, where the mage kind of stands, there's like there's a little, I guess, a wheel, and then the wheel is all about the eight colleges of magic, or the 8 schools of magic. I wanted that impression for objective bases. I was able to press that down and replicate that into an objective base. So tools like that, blue stuff, is quite useful. I'm a big fan of like not only green stuff, but also milliput as well. I find is good. I probably, when I do bases, I probably use more milliput than green stuff. I do hear that milliput combined with green stuff, like a 50-50 blend, is actually quite good.
Yes.
I've got a hobby saw, so cutting down particular parts can be challenging. So you can get like these really fine blades. But I think, to Ricky's point, if I don't care about the other part, I might just use the clipper. What else? What else have I got?
It's 1.5mm brass rod. Sorry, I just double checked my eBay.
Cool. The internet freaked out. They're like, "Oh my god, 25mm brass rod."
1.5mm.
And I think that for me, when I started using green stuff, what really helped me become a better green stuff person was getting the appropriate tools. You can get like these little, like, is it silicone, the rubber kind of tipped, and you can kind of, and using things like water and Vaseline can really help you sculpting with green stuff. I think previously I was using like a metal tool that just clearly wasn't working, but and even just heating up green stuff as well could be very helpful.
Yeah.
And like you were saying before, you don't have to be limited to green stuff. You've got milliput or even brown stuff. I use brown stuff from time to time when you want more slightly sharper edges, things like weapons, things like armor panels. Green stuff tends to have this slight softness to it.
Yeah.
Brown stuff is a good alternative for those types of things, I found.
There's a couple of options. Like, there's a silver version as well. There's a couple of different versions that do different things. You're right. I've got some brown stuff as well. Green stuff, blue stuff, brown stuff, like this.
The thing is, if you go on websites like Green Stuff World, you can spend an absolute fortune. You've got things like the rollers for the different impressions. You've got all sorts of weird and wonderful things. You can get very lost in places like that and spend an obscene amount of money very quickly.
That's probably a really good point as well. Is like, if you look at websites like Green Stuff World, for example, they've got rollers, and so like let's say I was a Nurgle player and I wanted more tentacles, or I wanted to make my own, I want to make more bestial type or corrupted type Nurgle models. They've got a roller that allows you to create tentacles literally from green stuff, and it'll do the impression, so it looks like tails, and it'll look like, there's actually a whole range of things. So you can go out there, and there are plenty of places that sell bits or things that allow you to use green stuff to make. I remember when I was going to do my Terrorgeist, I had this inspiration that I wanted to put chainmail on my Terrorgeist. And Green Stuff World have this thing where they literally, you press down and it creates green stuff into chainmail. So it's got the little loops and the little holes. And I'm like, sweet, that allows me to do chainmail on horses, chainmails on dragons. I could do whatever I want. The world is your oyster. Go use Google.
Yeah, it's very true.
You'll build up the tools as you go. You're not going to start a project with all of them, but 2-3 projects in, they're going to build up.
Any advice you give me using green stuff? Any things that you've learned along the way?
It's hard. Like I'm gapful like a pro. I have my silicone tools. I love them. Arguably, I use more saliva than water to weigh it down, but again, that's laziness and ill-preparedness. I might not have a water pot nearby. But it feels almost organic with sculpting it. It is not necessarily a technical sculpt. It feels more like drawing, like a pencil drawing. You are following the curves round. You're not jabbing. Unless you want to cause a hole, then you can jab.
And it definitely is a case of practice, I think. The first time anyone does anything with green stuff, well, the first time you don't mix it properly and it never sets. But the second time anyone ever does anything with green stuff is it looks horrible. And I think it is just a case of practice, finding people who've got tutorials online, doing things like that, keeping it wet all the time, and being a bit patient with it. Because if you use it immediately after you've mixed it, it's too soft to do lots of things with. You have to leave it to cure a little bit before you start working with it, because sometimes it just, you can get something that looks really, really nice, and because it's still in that really soft state, it will slowly sort of flatten over the course of the next 10 minutes, and you go, I've wasted however long sculpting this lovely fur that now looks like someone's been pushed up against it for the last half hour.
I know some of the tutorials that I found the most useful for green stuff. So Marek Wolf, who is or was in the chat, he does YouTube tutorials that he's a green stuff master, in my opinion. So check him out. I would highly recommend it. But, you know, Vince Venturella, there's a lot of cool people that do green stuff and they specialize in that space. But you're right. Like when I did it for the first time, it looked like dog shit. It truly did. But the good thing is I can just rip it off, throw it away, and start again. I can do that again and again and again, and green stuff's really cheap, so it's not like I've just spent a lot of money. Oh, another idea that Vince Venturella taught me was he makes like this plastic putty. I don't know if you guys use this, but he'll melt down his old sprues with plastic glue to make like a putty, so you can then use that putty to fill in some of your gaps or to build out a model, and it will dry like plastic, like the model. So that was something that has helped me as well as a tool with my green stuff. So
if not, if you don't feel like melting down the sprue, Vallejo do a similar product, which is a gap filler thing. And I've experimented a few times with liquid green stuff, and I find that the shrinkage is a bit of a problem. So sometimes alternatives like this, like the liquid sprue or the gap filler from Vallejo, work a bit better because they tend to keep the shape and they don't tend to shrink down, and you end up with this, oh, now I've got another gap that I need to fill, and you end up cracking out the normal green stuff to fix the job that should have been done by the liquid green stuff.
Anything else you guys want to add to that topic? Cool. Sorry, I'm losing my voice. This is how excited I am about this chat. So we've kind of talked about models. We've talked about sourcing bits. We've talked about green stuff. Any advice or any recommendations when it comes to taking your models to a tournament? So like Ricki, for example, you've got your models that clearly don't. Some of them look very Cities of Sigmar. Some clearly don't. Like, no offense, it's not a Luminarch. Like you showed me before, that's not a Luminarch. It's cool, but it's not a Luminarch. So, what advice do you have for me as and obviously this goes to JP as well. But what advice do you have for me if I'm going to go to tournaments, whether it is official Games Workshop tournaments, whether it is events in general, and I want to play with my army? Do you talk to the TO in advance? What are the conversations you have with your opponent? How do you remind them that this spider thing is a Luminarch, not a Griffin or a big spider? Like, talk me through this process, and like, what tips would you have for me if I was taking my highly converted army to an event?
So most events I do at Warhammer World, so it's near to me, it's easy, they do a lot of events. Their events team will always happily take an email way in advance, shortly in advance, give them more than a week's notice, but they'll take the email, and they have never rejected an idea yet. And if you've seen most of my models, there's plenty in there you can reject. Like I said, that not necessarily doesn't look like a Luminarch. It doesn't have wings. It couldn't possibly be a Griffin. I don't see the confusion there, but as long as you talk to them about it and you go, it's based on the right size. So in terms of gameplay, if I've changed the proportions, I will always give you line of sight. There could be 3 different buildings in the way. You're always going to have line of sight to that model, because I can't guarantee the original Griffin's wing isn't an inch higher than I've got on mine. So opponent gets benefit of the doubt whenever that comes up. The events team will usually email me back. They're usually absolutely fine. And I've started doing pictorial army lists. So when I give you my army list, every unit has a picture next to it showing exactly what's going to be on the table against you. So if you do get confused mid-game, you can just look down at my army list and go, weird Walker thing with glowy blue crystal, Luminarch. And fortunately, each of my conversions look suitably unique that even on little pictures, you aren't going to confuse that with the actual Griffin. You know, you'll be able to tell them apart based on the list, which is a courtesy to the opponent, realistically. The TOs, every one events team person I've met has been lovely. They love the hobby. They love conversions. At no point are they going to say, don't bring a conversions event, because they want to see it there. But you need to give them the notice and give your opponent the courtesy of saying, you're probably not going to recognize these because I don't think anyone else has these that you'll ever have faced. So here's exactly what they are. And if there's any confusion, we'll stop, and benefit of doubt will go your way.
Yeah, that's great. Because I think one of the concerns that I know when I asked the internet for some advice and some questions, though, one of the biggest concerns was modeling for advantage. Whether you reduce the size of a particular model, to your point, the Griffin's wings would be spread out and your particular model doesn't, or it's not high enough, or you've made a Phoenix Guard that doesn't look like Phoenix Guard, and then in the heat of the battle, I forget they're Phoenix Guard, and it's almost like an I gotcha moment. So there was a bit of trepidation around like bringing in and to what level do I convert other than just a head swap. But it sounds like you're talking to the tournament organizer in advance. I imagine you're sending photos in advance, like, hey, and obviously as Warhammer World, for example, gets to know you, they're going to remember some of your models, but sending photos in advance, showing off what it is, the conversation you're having your opponent. I love the fact that you're giving people the benefit of the doubt. That's very, very kind and very, very good of you.
It's also, so before an event, because I don't necessarily, I'll never win an event. My army list will probably be online for about 2 or 3 weeks beforehand. So if you're following the event, you're on Twitter and you look around to see anyone that's going to Throne of Skulls doubles, you can probably, if you wanted to, see my list and tailor against it, but I'm not going to be your strongest opponent that weekend. So you've just tailored to the bottom of tables. But you have that kind of advanced notice that some people going there will have been able to see and prepare and necessarily be aware of what these models are. There's no sneaking out a sort of half an inch tall Phoenix Guard that you're not going to recognize on the table. I like sharing my models, and I'm not there to win, so the pictures are going to be everywhere before you go as well.
Yeah, I think for me the critical piece here is that the intention, and I had a conversation literally last night with Dan from the Honest Wargamer, Dan Unsupervised, and we're talking about sportsmanship, and we're talking about just the intention that you have when you come to the table and being a good human and being a good sport. And I think here the intention is quite clear. The intention with your Tree Lord Ancient, which is looks nothing like a Tree Lord Ancient. The intention is not to reduce the size. The intention is not to confuse your opponent. The intention is really to build a narrative force that you're having fun to convert in Kitbash that tells a story. And the fact that you're willing to give your opponent the benefit of the doubt when you bring it to the table just shows, you're a great sport and your intentions are clear. Not that you're cutting half the model off, that it's submerged underwater because my narrative is they live in a swamp. But clearly you're blocking line of sight and getting all the benefits, but none of the negatives.
Tree Lord's still growing. It's just an arm out the ground as it gets there. It'll evolve as the battle goes on.
JP, what are your thoughts? Do you take your models to events? Yeah. Have you ever got any feedback?
I think it's exactly what I will basically just be reiterating what Ricki said, basically. But the onus is on you to make sure that everyone's aware what everything is, and the fact that yes, it's unconventional. But again, as Ricki says, if you're coming to an event with an army that's so different and so unique, in general, maybe you've done it purely for the aesthetics. The chances are it's not going to be the most competitive thing in the world. Chances are it's not going to be smaller. I mean, in general, I don't tend to go smaller with my conversions. Things tend to end up much bigger than intended. So I don't think I've ever had it where it's smaller than the original model, much larger, and still just about fits on the base, maybe.
That's exactly what Nino, who's a narrative event organizer in the chat, just said. He's like, every time he does a kit bash, it's always bigger than the original. You just when you're doing something like that, it just becomes larger than life. It does become bigger. You keep to the original base, or you keep to as close to the original base as possible. I think that's where, if you were a tournament attendee and you wanted to do well at a tournament, keeping to the original base and trying to make it as reflective as possible as what you're trying to make it. So if you are trying to kit bash, and I had this conversation recently with somebody who were trying to make Phoenix Guard, but more like Wood Elf type Phoenix Guard or Living City type Phoenix Guard. And it's tough because if you're going to draw upon the Glade Guard, like how do you take the Glade Guard bodies but make it Phoenix Guard and not just fancy Glade Guard? So just putting a head swap is often not enough. It just depends. You just got to make sure if you're going to a tournament that it looks as similar or as about 70% of what you're trying to make it look like. But if you're going to events and narratives and you don't really care about, just do what you want to do. Because the last thing I'd want people to walk away with is getting super inspired. They do a whole bunch of conversions, and then the tournament organizer goes, "No, you can't bring this. Does not look like Gotrek." And I've seen this. I've seen this a few times actually, where people have tried to convert Gotrek, and they've just used like a standard dwarf. You're like, are you just trying to be cheap and trying to avoid paying for Gotrek, or is there something that's tied in? And I think that's where intention really comes into play.
The internet's often a lot harsher than a tournament player as well. So I've seen plenty of people online who go, I would never play your army. It's too confusing. It's 240k. If we were at an event, I would throw the game and leave. And you're just throwing away an easy win, let's be fair. I win 1 out of 6 games at a weekend, and I apologise to that one person I beat. But no player in person said anything other than, oh, what's that? Can I have a look at it? Can I see it closer? No one I've met in person has ever been as vitriolic as that one person online who will tell you that you've clearly gamed to win because there's 0.5 millimeter difference on your tree lord. It's not reflective of the player you'll meet.
I've sadly seen it once. Once in my whole AOS career, I've seen it once. It wasn't to me, it was at an event, and someone was running like a Orc Courage and Overlord's force that was drawn from inspiration from like the 40k orcs. And I remember to this day, this opponent just thought it was 240k, and basically it got to a point where they didn't even play. But that's one from... I probably attended like 100 tournaments, and I've played tournaments across the world. It was just one experience I've seen. There's always one douchebag out there, let's be honest. But you're right. I run a tournament, and normally I don't think I've ever knocked someone back unless their intention was just like, oh, I don't want to buy a Merworm. I don't want to go buy a Rogue Idol, so I'm going to go... No, like you can clearly see the intention was they were just trying to get out of buying the official model.
Here's a rock from my garden with googly eyes on it.
Here's a bunch of blue tack that I've stuck onto a base, and I've sprayed it Mechanicus.
I think you can see the passion in an army, and I think a tournament organizer can see when it's a project that's been done for passion and when it's a gamey person. If it is a like 20 base with 1 skeleton arm on each, that's markedly different than someone who's got 1 crawling out of a grave, 1's dragging a corpse behind him. You'll see the time investment on it as well as the effort and the passion.
JP, anyone want to add to that?
No, I completely agree. Completely agree with that. Nothing more to add to that one, really. I definitely think I've never had any problems with people saying, oh, your Beast Lord is slightly too high. I've never had any problems with anyone saying, oh, he's overlapping the base. I can't pile in properly against him. People say, oh, wow, can I look? Like Ricki was saying before. And I think that massively trumps any kind of small thing that you might have from things being slightly the wrong size, slightly too... And again, like Ricki says, as long as you are giving them the benefit of the doubt with anything regarding rules, and if you've made the army and you've made it as this passion project, I think it's in your interest to do that because you want to play with it as your army. You want the games. In my opinion, I'm not so worried about winning so much. I want to play with this army that I've spent so much time building and converting. The winning is secondary to me. So even if you have the one in 100 games, like you're saying, I think it's a price worth paying eventually.
Yeah,
I think what's really cool as well is that when I bring my converted army to the table, and Ricki, I'm sure you get this, and JP, so do yourselves, is that people get really excited to play your army. They're like, oh, this is something really unique. I'm really actually fortunate to and people take photos, and I actually find that people take a lot more photos when I bring a converted army when they don't bring a converted army. Do you guys feel the same?
I love photos of a game. I'm really bad at remembering, so I get very into my game as well. So I'll remember on turn 1, and I'll be like, oh, that's an amazing army, let me take a photo of there. And I'll remember at the very end of the turn when the clock's run down, but I miss something amazing. And that's one of the things I'd love to get more, because I've played against some beautifully converted armies, and I get home and go, I love that model, but I didn't get a picture of it while I was there. And then like you're trying to rack your mind from memory for it. And from someone who's played against the converted armies, I love seeing them. I love finding those bits, and even the opponent's moving. Sometimes you'll sit there, and I don't have a tactical mindset. I'm not going for my next turn. I'm like, that wheel's from that kit, and I'm gonna go home. I'm gonna get that wheel. It's inspiring for me to play against. But I don't know if my opponents feel the same way. But when I face one with a model I like, I'm enjoying it so much because I'm also model building in my head at the same time. And it might be why I'm so bad at the game is because in my head I already go, oh, I want to do what he's done there. I'm going to get those.
Your strategy is, where do I source this?
He's winning because his model clearly looks better than mine, so I'm going to build that next time and I'll win because the model looks better. That's how the game works, right?
Pretty sure it does. But yeah, like for me, like I get really excited to play people's armies that have converted. I think it's just an enjoyable experience. It makes it unique, and to be able to play a force like yours in the Midnight City, that's like a once in a lifetime. So if I did get matched up to you at a tournament, I'm going to take a lot of photos. I'm going to really enjoy this experience. It's no offense to anyone who doesn't convert, but it's just that I can play a generic Slaanesh army whenever. But if I played someone who's gone above and beyond and done some crazy stuff with Slaanesh, now we're talking. Cool. I thought I'd open the space if anyone else want to add anything. Man, we've talked a lot. We've talked a lot about conversion and kit bashing, and you guys have shown off some amazing pieces, which has got me inspired. I think maybe my closing comment or my closing question is, what's next? What are you currently working on, or what's some of the craziness that's bubbling in your mind that you're thinking about and going to put on the table soon, maybe? Or maybe it's still brewing. JP, what are you currently working on, or what's brewing in your mind?
Well, I'm actually working on I think this is the standard, is you work on about 6 things simultaneously. I'm actually working on a couple of things. So I'm doing a commission for a great guy called Jordan in the US, where we're doing some Caradron Overlords, but Skaven themed. So I've taken, I think actually maybe there's some pictures that I sent you, but we've taken the Caradron Overlord ships. We've added the play catapult side supports and turned them into wings, so that it looks like they're flying around. And then we've got them crashing into some chimneys, crashing into towers. It's quite fun. We're doing that. And then simultaneously, I'm making an Armies on Parade board, which with some Nurgle Christopher Columbus crossover, which is quite fun as well.
What?
I know. Like,
go. Sorry, I'm bringing up the share screen. I've actually just pulled up, and Jordan's in the chat. He's just like, that's me. So here we go.
So wow. This is the original one that I did. So Jordan got in touch and said, "Oh yeah, this would be really cool. Can we do a whole army like this?" And so we're in the very first stages of this. I think there's another picture of various things in various shades of grey. I'm
not going to show it, but I'm going to tell people to go on your Twitter and go check that out.
Please do. But yes, so at the moment, all sorts of things. Caradron rats and Nurgle Columbus crossovers.
That's awesome. That is very, very, very cool. I can't wait to see that ending.
No,
and Ricki.
My AdMech finally came out, the cavalry, so I've got them. So I'm doing the fast element of my force, so lots of cog striders. There's going to be a mechanical griffin. Got my bird dudes, got them in, and I'm editing my battle time because I can and I like it and it's shiny. And as much as I love building a model, when I managed to print my battle time out, that was a moment where I was like, it's all come together. Because it has pictures of my modeling as well. I made it. Which, again, it's part of the hobby. So I'll build a model, I'll write the story, I'll write the rules for it. I'm a completionist. And then I will go to an event and I'll either play it officially or unofficially. I'll find a way of using my rules. And I get to play test, I get to talk to players about rules, because we've all gone, that's too much, that's too little. But when I get to play test, I get players to give feedback as they go and go, why is it too much? Why is it too little? Does it fit what the model looks like? Because I want there to be that symbiosis.
I love it. And if anyone's curious on what I'm working on, much like you guys, I have like 100 projects on the go. I'm a bit of a hobby butterfly at the moment with COVID. I can't focus on one project. So I'm working on my KO halfling for my Tempest Eye. I'm doing my human white lion chariot scourge runner chariots. I've got a dreadlord on black dragon, which is the carmine dragon mixed with the old Forge World Leopold the Black. So I'm kit bashing that. I am trying to work out these gargants, and I've got a few other ideas that. But I think what I've realized over time is when I first started playing Warhammer, I think playing the game was the thing that I enjoyed the most. Now I realize that I enjoy building the most. And if I could be a commissioned builder, I would. And I will scrape your mold lines, I will glue your parts, I will clip your sprues. That is the part that I enjoy the most. And I think that's why I've really found pleasure and joy in kit bashing and converting, because it's something that I can do on the couch with my wife while she's watching crime shows. I can be clipping sprues, I can be, carving things. I don't need the hobby light. I can be building, I can be, being present with my family, but I'm also doing hobby, and it just looks great on the table. And I mess up, cool, I'll try something different. I'm always learning, and I think for me that's another part, is just constantly learning, evolving, trying new skills, being hobby curious, talking to other hobbyists like you guys, going, how did you do what you did, and finding new ways to improve my level of hobby.
I think one thing that people don't talk about is when you start doing more and more work with green stuff, is you start finding it everywhere. I don't know about you guys. I find that sometimes I'm out and about and I'm looking down at my fingernails and I say, there's some green stuff stuck to my finger. Oh God, have I been walking around for the last 2 hours with that?
No, that's great. No, I'm like, it's kind of like dog hair. You find green stuff or a melee part. I don't know if you guys have dogs. I've got dog hair everywhere. Cool. I've got nothing else I wanted to ask you guys, because this has been pretty immersive, and I've taken a lot, and I've got some new inspiration, and I can't wait. And like Google search as well, I can't stress enough, Google image searching and getting inspiration on Instagram, on Pinterest. Maybe that's one other idea is, as you start sourcing ideas, save those pictures, set up a Pinterest board, collect all those pictures, and I find that I go back to those pictures over time. So I see something, I'm like, that will be useful sometime. I don't know when, but I'll save it, and then I'll come back to it, and then I can kind of bring it to life down the track.
Yeah, definitely. And maybe it's not for a project that you think you're going to be doing anytime soon. It could just be, that's cool. You put it in a folder of cool things, and who knows?
I love that. Ricki, take us home. Is there any shout outs, any people you want to recommend? If people are going to talk to you more, where can they find you?
So I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook. On Twitter, you'll find me fanboying. If I find something I love, I will share it. It'll even be in a list of other things I've loved that week. You'll find me there. I live on Twitter, basically. If I'm at work, I probably shouldn't be on it, but I'm somewhere around there. But I love people's projects. And all I'd say is when someone does something you love, don't be afraid to ask questions, because hobbyists love to talk about what they've done. You might be afraid to ask where the arm comes, but if you ask the question, they're going to tell you, because they spent hours on it. They love that model that much that you ask them to talk about their stuff.
It's quite hard to stop.
I'll go one further. I'll go one further and say, tell people you like their stuff. Just don't hit the thumbnail and say I love it. Comment and say why you like it. That is so rewarding, and I need to do that more often. I do it on Twitter. I need to do it more. But I imagine that commentary goes a long way.
Yeah.
JP, if people want to talk to you, they want to learn more about your stuff, any shout outs that you want to make?
I have nothing to promote in particular, but no, you can find me on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook or all three. All three. Under JP Miniatures. Come and have a look.
And I will put them. I'll put them all both in the channel description.
Thank you very much. Fantastic.
All right. Well, we've kind of wrapped up. It's been an absolute pleasure. JP, Ricki, thank you both very much. This has been almost 2 hours of absolute kit bashing, converting goodness. Thank you, chat, for hanging out with us. It's a different time zone for me, so I get to have my whole day. You guys get to go to bed, but I'm actually quite fortunate that it's my morning, because I now can take your ideas and go convert. While if you guys are in the UK and you've watched this, you're all inspired at 1 o'clock in the morning, and good luck going to bed before work, because I have a public holiday. You don't.
Cheers.
Ricki, JP, it's an absolute pleasure. I'm going to close out the show, but thank you, folks. If you've enjoyed this, make sure to like. Thanks, both.
Thanks.
Cheers.
G'day. I hope you enjoyed that video and you're left with some new ideas. One of the biggest ways you can contribute to AOS Coach is by liking the video you just watched and leaving a comment in the comment section. This lets YouTube know this is a good video and it should recommend it to other hobbyists. If you'd also like to support the channel even further like these bloody legends, go check out AOS Coach on Patreon. Otherwise, don't forget your triumph.